At 32, he had spent over a decade in the Navy, working his way up through the ranks with determination and an unwavering commitment to protocol. He believed deeply in the chain of command, in following procedures to the letter, and in ensuring that everyone who entered the base understood the importance of security measures. His colleagues respected him for his thoroughness, though some found his rigid adherence to rules somewhat intimidating. The morning had started like any other. Marcus checked his equipment, reviewed the daily security briefings, and positioned himself at his station. The first few hours passed without incident. Military personnel, contractors, and authorized civilians passed through the checkpoint with their usual efficiency. Marcus checked IDs, verified credentials, and maintained the professional demeanor that had become second nature to him over the years. It was around 9:30 when he noticed the young woman approaching the checkpoint. She was walking with what appeared to be uncertainty, frequently glancing at a piece of paper in her hand as if checking directions. Her uniform looked new, almost stiff, and it didn't quite fit her properly. The sleeves were slightly too long, and the entire outfit had that fresh-from-the-supply-store appearance that marked her as someone very new to military life. Marcus immediately categorized her as a rookie, probably fresh out of basic training and likely assigned to some administrative position on the base. He had seen hundreds like her over the years, young people who were still adjusting to military life, still learning the ropes, and still making the kind of small mistakes that marked them as inexperienced. There was something about her demeanor that reinforced this impression. She seemed nervous, almost hesitant, as she approached the security checkpoint. When she reached Marcus's station, she fumbled with her bag, clearly searching for her identification. This was another red flag for Marcus. Experienced military personnel knew to have their ID ready well before reaching the checkpoint. It was basic protocol, drilled into everyone from day one. The fact that she was still searching for her credentials suggested to him that she was either very new or very unprepared. "Ma'am, I need to see your identification," Marcus said in his standard professional tone. He maintained his posture and kept his expression neutral, but internally he was already forming judgments about this obviously inexperienced person. The woman continued to dig through her bag, pulling out various items and setting them aside. Marcus could see papers, pens, a water bottle, and other personal effects being removed as she searched. His patience began to wear thin. This was exactly the kind of disorganization that he found frustrating about new recruits. They hadn't yet learned the importance of being prepared, of having their essential documents easily accessible. "Ma'am," Marcus repeated, his tone becoming slightly more firm. "Your identification, please. There are other people waiting behind you." Indeed, a small line had begun to form behind the woman. Marcus could see a few contractors and military personnel waiting to pass through the checkpoint, and he was acutely aware that delays at security could create bottlenecks throughout the base. Efficiency was crucial, and this woman's lack of preparation was threatening that efficiency. Finally, the woman located her ID card, but as she pulled it from her bag, she accidentally knocked over her water bottle. The bottle rolled across the ground, and water spilled across the concrete. She immediately bent down to retrieve the bottle and clean up the spill, apologizing profusely. Marcus felt his irritation increase. This was amateur hour. Not only was she unprepared with her identification, but now she was creating a mess at the security checkpoint. He looked at the growing line behind her and made a decision that would prove to be the defining moment of his career. "Ma'am, please step aside," Marcus said sharply. "You're creating a disruption at this checkpoint. Other personnel need to pass through." The woman looked up from where she was cleaning up the spilled water, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I just need a moment to—" "No, ma'am," Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of his 8 years of military experience. "You need to get yourself organized before approaching a security checkpoint. This is a military installation, not a civilian facility. We have protocols here." But the woman continued to fumble with her belongings, trying to organize her papers while also dealing with the spilled water. Marcus could feel the eyes of other personnel on him, waiting to see how he would handle the situation. His reputation as someone who maintained order was on the line. Without thinking about the consequences, Marcus reached for the hose that was kept at the security station for cleaning purposes. It was typically used to wash down the checkpoint area at the end of each shift or to clean up any messes that occurred during the day. In his frustration and desire to assert control over the situation, Marcus turned on the water and directed a stream toward the area around the woman's feet. "There," he said tersely. "Now we can clean up this whole mess properly." What happened next occurred in slow motion. The force of the water from the hose was stronger than Marcus had anticipated. Instead of simply washing away the spilled water from the bottle, the stream caught the woman's uniform and soaked her from the waist down. Her papers scattered in the wind created by the water pressure, and her bag fell over, spilling more of its contents across the wet concrete. The woman stood up slowly, water dripping from her uniform, her face no longer showing embarrassment, but something much more serious. There was a moment of complete silence at the checkpoint. The other personnel in line had stopped their conversations and were staring at the scene unfolding before them. Marcus suddenly realized that what he had intended as a quick cleanup had turned into something much more significant. "Sergeant," the woman said quietly, her voice carrying an edge that Marcus hadn't noticed before, "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." It was at that moment that Marcus looked more carefully at the woman's identification card, which was now lying on the wet concrete. As he bent down to retrieve it, he saw something that made his blood run cold. The ID didn't show the rank of a new recruit or junior enlisted person as he had assumed. Instead, it clearly displayed the insignia and information for Rear Admiral Elizabeth Chen, the newly appointed commanding officer of Naval Base Coronado. Marcus felt his world shift beneath his feet. He looked up at the woman, really seeing her for the first time. Despite her youthful appearance in the ill-fitting uniform, there was something in her eyes that spoke of authority and experience, something he had completely missed in his rush to judgment. "Admiral Chen," he stammered, trying to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. I didn't realize." Admiral Chen bent down and began collecting her scattered papers, her movements deliberate and controlled. Other personnel at the checkpoint had begun to recognize what was happening, and Marcus could feel the weight of their stares. Word was already beginning to spread among the waiting crowd that something significant had just taken place. "Sergeant Thompson?" Admiral Chen said, reading his name from his uniform as she stood up with her soggy papers. "I think we need to have a conversation about proper protocol and respect at this checkpoint." The reality of the situation began to sink in for Marcus. He had just sprayed down the new commanding officer of the entire base. His actions hadn't just been disrespectful to a junior enlisted person, as he had assumed. He had humiliated the highest-ranking officer on the installation, someone who quite literally held his career and the careers of everyone around him in her hands. As Admiral Chen walked past the checkpoint, her wet uniform leaving a trail of water drops on the concrete, Marcus stood frozen in place. The other personnel in line gave him looks that ranged from sympathy to shock to barely concealed amusement. He knew that within hours, if not minutes, the story of what had just happened would spread throughout the entire base. Marcus tried to continue his duties for the remainder of his shift, but his mind kept returning to those few minutes when everything had gone wrong. He replayed the incident over and over, trying to understand how he had misread the situation so completely. How had he failed to recognize the authority and experience that Admiral Chen must have possessed? How had his normally reliable instincts led him so far astray? As the morning progressed and more personnel passed through the checkpoint, Marcus began to notice changes in how people interacted with him. Some seemed more cautious, as if afraid that associating with him might damage their own careers. Others appeared to be suppressing smiles, clearly having heard about the incident. A few offered subtle words of sympathy, suggesting that they understood how such a mistake could occur. But perhaps most troubling for Marcus was the growing realization that his actions reflected not just on him personally, but on the entire security operation at the base. Naval Base Coronado was a prestigious installation, home to some of the most elite units in the Navy. The idea that the commanding officer had been treated with such disrespect at the very entrance to the base was deeply problematic from a professional standpoint. When his shift finally ended, Marcus found himself reluctant to leave his post. He knew that once he stepped away from the checkpoint, he would have to face the consequences of his actions. There would likely be meetings with his supervisors, formal reviews of the incident, and quite possibly disciplinary actions. His previously spotless military record was now tarnished by a single moment of poor judgment. As he walked across the base toward the administration building to report the incident to his commanding officer, Marcus reflected on how quickly things could change in military life. Just hours earlier, he had been a respected staff sergeant with a solid career trajectory. Now, he was facing the possibility that his future in the Navy might be in serious jeopardy. The base seemed different to him now, as if the very buildings and facilities were looking at him with disappointment. This was a place where he had planned to serve for many more years, perhaps even until retirement. But after what had happened at the checkpoint, Marcus wasn't sure if that future was still possible. The walk to the administration building gave him time to think about Admiral Chen and how she had handled the situation. Despite being soaked with water and having her papers scattered across the concrete, she had maintained her composure. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded immediate disciplinary action, and hadn't made a scene that would have further embarrassed Marcus in front of the other personnel. This realization only made Marcus feel worse about his actions. Admiral Chen had demonstrated the kind of professionalism and leadership that he himself should have shown. Instead of responding with anger or humiliation, she had remained calm and collected, even while being subjected to treatment that no commanding officer should ever experience. As he reached the steps of the administration building, Marcus took a deep breath and prepared himself for what was likely to be one of the most difficult conversations of his military career. He had no idea how Admiral Chen planned to address the incident, but he knew that whatever came next would define not just his immediate future, but possibly the rest of his time in the Navy. Marcus spent the rest of Tuesday in a state of anxious anticipation, waiting for the inevitable summons to appear before his commanding officer. He went through the motions of his regular duties, but his mind was constantly elsewhere, replaying the morning's events and imagining various scenarios for how the situation might be resolved. Every time his phone buzzed or someone approached his workstation, he expected to receive orders to report for disciplinary proceedings. But the call never came. Tuesday evening arrived without any official word about the incident at the checkpoint. Marcus found this silence almost more unsettling than immediate punishment would have been. In his experience, the military didn't typically let matters involving commanding officers go unaddressed for long. The fact that nothing had happened suggested to him that something bigger might be brewing behind the scenes. Wednesday morning brought a different kind of anxiety. As Marcus reported for his security detail, he noticed that several personnel seemed to be watching him more closely than usual. Word of the incident had clearly spread throughout the base, and people were curious to see what would happen next. Marcus tried to maintain his professional demeanor, but the weight of constant observation made it difficult to focus on his duties. Around mid-morning, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at the checkpoint. Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, one of the most senior enlisted personnel on the base, approached the security station with a serious expression. Marcus had worked with Rodriguez on several occasions over the years and had always respected his experience and judgment. "Thompson," Rodriguez said quietly, "I need to speak with you privately for a moment." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. This was it, he thought. Rodriguez was probably here to deliver official word about disciplinary proceedings or to escort him to a meeting with the command staff. He followed Rodriguez to a small office adjacent to the security checkpoint, his mind racing through possible explanations and apologies. "Sit down," Rodriguez said, closing the door behind them. His tone wasn't angry, but it was serious enough to make Marcus even more nervous. "I've been hearing some interesting stories about what happened yesterday morning." Marcus nodded, unsure of how to respond. He had decided the night before that honesty would be his best policy, regardless of the consequences. "Master Chief, I made a serious mistake. I misjudged the situation and acted inappropriately. I take full responsibility for what happened." Rodriguez studied Marcus for a long moment before speaking again. "Tell me exactly what you were thinking when you turned on that hose." This was not the question Marcus had expected. He had prepared himself for accusations and formal charges, not for what seemed like a genuine attempt to understand his perspective. "I was frustrated," he admitted. "The woman seemed disorganized and unprepared. She was causing delays at the checkpoint, and I thought I was dealing with a new recruit who needed to learn about proper protocol." "And you decided that spraying her with water would teach her that lesson?" Rodriguez asked, his tone remaining neutral. "No," Marcus said quickly. I wasn't trying to spray her, I was trying to clean up the spilled water, but the pressure was stronger than I expected." "It was a mistake, but that doesn't excuse what happened." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, considering Marcus's explanation. "Thompson, what do you know about Admiral Chen?" The question caught Marcus off guard. "I know she's the new commanding officer of the base, and I know I showed her tremendous disrespect yesterday." "Beyond that, not much." "Well," Rodriguez said, "let me fill in some of the details that might help you understand the full scope of this situation." Over the next 30 minutes, Rodriguez provided Marcus with a comprehensive overview of Admiral Chen's background and career achievements. What he learned fundamentally changed Marcus's understanding of not just the previous day's incident, but of his own assumptions about leadership and authority. Admiral Elizabeth Chen, Rodriguez explained, had joined the Navy 18 years earlier as a recent graduate of the Naval Academy. Unlike many officers who came from military families or traditional backgrounds, Chen had grown up in a working-class immigrant family in San Francisco. Her parents had operated a small restaurant, and she had worked there throughout high school to help support her family while maintaining the academic excellence necessary for admission to the academy. During her time at the Naval Academy, Chen had distinguished herself not just academically, but as someone who understood the experiences of enlisted personnel in ways that many officers did not. She had spent summers working alongside maintenance crews and support staff, learning about the practical aspects of military operations from the ground up. This experience had given her a unique perspective on the importance of every person's role in the overall mission. After graduation, Chen had requested assignments that would give her broad experience across different aspects of naval operations. While many of her academy classmates sought prestigious positions in high-profile units, Chen had deliberately chosen roles that would teach her about logistics, administration, personnel management, and the day-to-day challenges faced by military installations. Her first significant command had been a logistics support unit responsible for supplying remote outposts in challenging environments. Under her leadership, the unit had achieved remarkable improvements in efficiency and morale. Chen had implemented innovative systems for resource management and had established programs to address the personal and professional development needs of her personnel. Rodriguez told Marcus about Chen's deployment history, which included 3 tours in active conflict zones. During one particularly challenging deployment, she had led a joint task force responsible for establishing and maintaining supply lines in hostile territory. Her unit had faced constant threats, and Chen had demonstrated both tactical expertise and exceptional leadership under pressure. What struck Marcus most about these stories was Rodriguez's description of Chen's leadership style. Unlike commanders who relied primarily on rank and formal authority, Chen had earned respect through competence, fairness, and genuine concern for her personnel. She was known for remembering the names and personal circumstances of hundreds of people under her command, and for making decisions based on careful consideration of how they would affect everyone involved. She's not someone who pulls rank unless absolutely necessary, Rodriguez explained. Chen believes that real authority comes from earning respect, not from demanding it. That's probably why she didn't immediately call for your head yesterday morning. Rodriguez also shared details about the circumstances that had led to Chen's assignment as commanding officer of Naval Base Coronado. The previous commander had left under less than ideal circumstances, and the base had been experiencing various challenges related to morale, efficiency, and coordination between different units. Chen had been selected specifically because of her reputation for turning around difficult situations and her ability to unite personnel around common goals. The interesting thing, Rodriguez continued, is that she specifically requested to arrive at the base quietly, without the usual fanfare that comes with a change of command. She wanted to observe normal operations and get a feel for the real culture of the installation before making her presence known officially. This revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Admiral Chen hadn't just been disorganized or unprepared when she approached the checkpoint. She had been intentionally trying to observe the base's operations from the perspective of an ordinary person. Marcus's treatment of her hadn't just been disrespectful. It had been a perfect example of exactly the kind of attitudes and behaviors that Chen would need to address as commanding officer. "Master Chief," Marcus said quietly, "how bad is this situation really?" Rodriguez was silent for a moment before responding. "That depends largely on what Admiral Chen decides to do. She could view this as an isolated incident that requires disciplinary action and move on. Or she could see it as indicative of broader problems that need systematic attention." The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Rodriguez opened it to find a young ensign holding an official-looking envelope. "Master Chief Rodriguez, I have a message for Staff Sergeant Thompson from Admiral Chen's office." Marcus felt his heart rate increase as Rodriguez accepted the envelope and handed it to him. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it and read the brief message inside. The note was typed on official letterhead and contained only a few lines. "Staff Sergeant Thompson, please report to my office tomorrow at 0800 hours for a private meeting. Rear Admiral Elizabeth Chen." "Well," Rodriguez said after reading the message over Marcus's shoulder, "it looks like you're going to have a chance to address this situation directly with the Admiral." The rest of Wednesday passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. Marcus spent hours thinking about what he would say to Admiral Chen, how he could possibly apologize for his actions, and what the consequences might be. He considered various approaches, from formal military apologies to personal appeals for understanding. None of them seemed adequate for the magnitude of what had occurred. That evening, Marcus called his father, a retired army sergeant who had always been a source of wisdom and guidance. Without revealing any specific details about the incident, Marcus asked for advice about how to handle a situation where he had made a serious mistake involving a superior officer. "Son," his father said, after listening to Marcus's carefully worded description of his dilemma, "the most important thing in situations like this is to be completely honest about what you did wrong and why you did it. Don't make excuses, don't try to minimize your responsibility, and don't expect forgiveness. Just tell the truth and accept whatever consequences come from it. The advice was simple but profound. Marcus realized that he had been so focused on trying to find ways to mitigate the damage from his actions that he hadn't fully accepted responsibility for them. Whatever happened in his meeting with Admiral Chen, he needed to approach it with complete honesty and accountability. Thursday morning arrived grey and overcast, matching Marcus's mood as he prepared for what might be the most important meeting of his military career. He spent extra time ensuring that his uniform was perfect, his appearance was impeccable, and his bearing reflected the professionalism he should have demonstrated at the security checkpoint. As he walked across the base toward the administration building, Marcus reflected on everything Rodriguez had told him about Admiral Chen's background and leadership style. He began to understand that his misjudgment of her had been based on superficial observations and unconscious biases. Her youthful appearance, her unfamiliar uniform, and her apparent nervousness at the checkpoint had led him to make assumptions that were not only wrong, but deeply unfair. The administration building seemed more imposing than usual as Marcus approached it. This was where the most important decisions about the base's operations were made, where policies were established, and where careers were often decided. Marcus had been in the building many times over the years, but never under circumstances quite like these. Admiral Chen's office was on the 3rd floor, and Marcus took the stairs rather than the elevator, needing the extra time to compose himself. As he reached the appropriate floor and walked down the hallway toward her office, he passed several other personnel who gave him curious looks. Word of his meeting with the Admiral had clearly spread, adding another layer of pressure to an already stressful situation. When Marcus reached the outer office, he was greeted by a yeoman who checked his identification and confirmed his appointment. "The Admiral will see you shortly," the yeoman said professionally. "Please have a seat." Marcus sat in the waiting area, trying to control his nervousness while reviewing once more what he planned to say. Through the partially open door to Admiral Chen's office, he could hear her speaking on the telephone, her voice calm and authoritative as she discussed various base operations with someone. The conversation reminded Marcus that whatever personal consequences he faced, Admiral Chen had an entire installation to command and countless responsibilities that went far beyond dealing with his mistakes. After about 10 minutes, the yeoman indicated that Admiral Chen was ready to see him. Marcus stood up, straightened his uniform one final time, and walked through the door into an office that would determine the next chapter of his military career. Admiral Chen's office was larger than Marcus had expected, but it was furnished with a simplicity that surprised him. Unlike many senior officers who filled their offices with awards, photographs, and memorabilia from their careers, Chen's space was notably understated. A few naval prints hung on the walls, her desk was organized but not cluttered, and there was a small seating area with 2 chairs facing each other near the window. Admiral Chen stood up from her desk as Marcus entered the room. She was wearing a properly fitted uniform this time, and Marcus could see immediately that his first impression of her had been completely wrong. There was an unmistakable air of authority about her, a confidence and presence that spoke of years of leadership experience. How had he missed these qualities at the checkpoint? "Staff Sergeant Thompson," Admiral Chen said, gesturing toward the seating area near the window. "Please, have a seat. Thank you for coming." Marcus remained standing and came to attention. "Ma'am, before we begin, I need to apologize for my actions at the security checkpoint. My behavior was completely inappropriate and unprofessional. There is no excuse for how I treated you." Admiral Chen studied him for a moment before responding. "I appreciate your apology, Sergeant Thompson, but before we discuss what happened, I'd like to understand a few things. Please, sit down. This conversation will be more productive if we can speak frankly." Marcus sat down carefully, maintaining his professional posture while trying to read Admiral Chen's expression. Her tone was serious but not hostile, which gave him a small measure of hope that the situation might not be as dire as he had feared. "Tell me about your background," Admiral Chen began. "How long have you been stationed at this base, and what has your experience been like here?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He had expected to be immediately confronted about his actions at the checkpoint, not asked about his general experiences. "Ma'am, I've been at Coronado for 8 years. I've served in various capacities, mostly in logistics and operation support. This is my first extended assignment to security detail. And before your time here?" Marcus provided a brief overview of his military career, including his training, previous assignments, and the deployments he had completed. As he spoke, he noticed that Admiral Chen was listening intently, occasionally asking follow-up questions about specific experiences or challenges he had faced. "You have a strong record," Admiral Chen observed after Marcus had finished his summary. Your supervisors speak highly of your reliability and attention to detail. That's part of what makes Tuesday's incident so interesting to me. Ma'am? Admiral Chen leaned forward slightly. Sergeant Thompson, you've been working at security checkpoints for several months now. In that time, how many people would you estimate have passed through your station? Marcus thought for a moment. Probably several thousand, ma'am. Maybe more. And in all of those interactions, have you ever had an incident similar to what happened on Tuesday? No, ma'am. Never anything like that. So what was different about Tuesday morning? What was it about that particular situation that led you to act so far outside your normal patterns of behavior? This was the question Marcus had been dreading, because it forced him to examine his own thought processes and biases. He took a deep breath before responding. Ma'am, I made assumptions about who you were based on your appearance and behavior. I saw someone who seemed disorganized and unprepared, and I let my frustration override my professionalism. What specifically led you to assume I was disorganized and unprepared? Marcus hesitated, realizing that answering honestly would require him to acknowledge some uncomfortable truths about his own prejudices. You seemed nervous, ma'am. Your uniform appeared new, and you were having difficulty locating your identification. I assumed you were a new recruit who hadn't yet learned proper protocol. I see. And based on that assumption, you felt justified in treating me with less respect than you would show to a more experienced service member?
No, ma'am, Marcus said quickly.
There's no justification for treating anyone with disrespect regardless of their experience level. I was wrong. Admiral Chen nodded slowly. That's an important recognition, Sergeant Thompson. But I want to dig a little deeper into this. When you saw someone you believed to be inexperienced and struggling, your first instinct was to assert dominance rather than to offer assistance. Why do you think that was? The question forced Marcus to examine aspects of his own behavior that he had never really considered before. He thought about his interactions with new personnel over the years and realized that Admiral Chen was identifying a pattern he had never fully acknowledged. I think, Marcus said slowly, that I've become accustomed to being in a position of authority at the checkpoint. I've developed habits of expecting certain standards of behavior, and when people don't meet those standards, I respond with control measures. Control measures, Admiral Chen repeated. That's an interesting way to put it. Tell me, when you've encountered truly inexperienced personnel in the past, personnel who genuinely needed guidance or assistance, how have you typically handled those situations? Marcus thought back through his recent experiences at the security checkpoint. He realized that Admiral Chen was right to probe this issue. When he encountered people who were clearly struggling or confused, his default response had indeed been to assert authority, rather than to provide helpful guidance. I think I've focused more on enforcing compliance than on helping people understand the reasons for our procedures, Marcus admitted. I've treated the checkpoint as a test that people needed to pass, rather than as an opportunity to ensure everyone understands proper security protocols. Admiral Chen smiled slightly, the first time Marcus had seen any warmth in her expression since entering the office. That's a very honest assessment, Sergeant Thompson. And it brings us to the heart of what I want to discuss with you. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the base grounds before turning back to face Marcus. What happened at the security checkpoint on Tuesday was inappropriate and unacceptable. There's no question about that, but it was also illuminating in ways that go far beyond your individual actions. Marcus wasn't sure how to respond, so he remained silent and waited for Admiral Chen to continue. I've been studying this base for several weeks before officially taking command, Admiral Chen explained. I've been reviewing personnel files, operational reports, efficiency metrics, and feedback from various units. What I've found is a pattern of issues related to communication, collaboration, and mutual respect between different levels of the organization. She returned to her seat and looked directly at Marcus. Your treatment of me at the checkpoint was a perfect example of a broader cultural problem that exists on this installation. Too many people in positions of authority have become focused on asserting control rather than facilitating success for their colleagues and subordinates. Marcus began to understand that this conversation was about much more than disciplinary action for his specific mistake. Admiral Chen was using the incident as a starting point for a larger discussion about leadership and organizational culture. Ma'am, what do you want me to do? Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment, apparently considering her response carefully. Sergeant Thompson, I have several options for how to handle what happened on Tuesday. I could pursue formal disciplinary action, which would likely result in a reprimand on your record and possibly affect your future career prospects. I could transfer you to a different position where you wouldn't be in direct contact with personnel entering the base. Or, I could use this situation as an opportunity to address the broader issues I've identified. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by the third option, ma'am. What if I told you that I want you to continue working at the security checkpoint, but with a completely different mission? Instead of viewing your role as enforcement-focused, I want you to think of yourself as a customer service representative and security educator. Marcus was surprised by the suggestion. Ma'am, I'm not sure I'm qualified for that kind of role. Actually, I think you might be exactly the right person for it, Admiral Chen replied. You've acknowledged your mistakes, you've shown genuine understanding of what went wrong, and you have the credibility that comes from years of military experience. Most importantly, you've demonstrated that you're capable of honest self-reflection. Admiral Chen went on to explain her vision for transforming the base's approach to security operations. Rather than focusing primarily on catching violations and enforcing compliance, she wanted security personnel to view their role as helping everyone who entered the base to understand and follow proper procedures. She envisioned a system where security checkpoints became positive interactions that reinforced the base's values and mission rather than adversarial encounters focused on finding fault. This kind of cultural change doesn't happen overnight, Admiral Chen said. It requires people who are willing to examine their own behaviors and commit to doing things differently. Based on our conversation today, I believe you have the potential to be a leader in this transformation. Marcus was overwhelmed by the unexpected direction the conversation had taken. He had come to the meeting prepared for punishment, possibly even for the end of his military career. Instead, Admiral Chen was offering him an opportunity to be part of a positive change at the base. Ma'am, why would you give me this chance after what I did? Admiral Chen's expression became more serious. Because, Sergeant Thompson, the best leaders are often people who have made significant mistakes and learned from them. You demonstrated poor judgment on Tuesday, but you've also shown integrity in acknowledging your errors and intelligence in understanding their implications. She paused before continuing. Also, because I believe that people deserve opportunities to grow and improve. The military is most effective when it helps personnel develop their potential rather than simply punishing them for their failures. Admiral Chen then outlined a specific plan for Marcus's new role. She wanted him to work with her staff to develop training materials and procedures that would help all security personnel understand their role in creating a positive environment at base entry points. She envisioned regular training sessions where personnel would practice customer service skills alongside security protocols. I also want you to serve as a liaison between security operations and the various units on base, Admiral Chen explained. Part of the problem I've identified is that different groups don't understand each other's challenges and requirements. I think your experience and perspective could help bridge those gaps. The meeting continued for another 30 minutes as Admiral Chen explained more details about her plans for improving operations and culture at the base. Marcus found himself increasingly impressed by the depth of her analysis and the thoughtfulness of her approach to leadership. This was clearly someone who had spent considerable time studying organizational dynamics and developing practical strategies for improvement. As the meeting drew to a close, Admiral Chen returned to the specific incident that had brought them together. Sergeant Thompson, I want to be clear about something. What happened on Tuesday can never be repeated. The respect and dignity of every person on this base is non-negotiable, regardless of their rank or position. Do you understand that? Yes, ma'am. Completely. Good. I also want you to understand that this new role I'm offering you comes with significant responsibilities. You'll be representing not just your own professionalism, but the entire security operation and my vision for this base. Are you prepared to accept that level of responsibility? Marcus thought about everything Admiral Chen had shared with him during their conversation. The opportunity she was offering represented a chance not just to recover from his mistake, but to contribute to meaningful improvements in how the base operated. It would require him to develop new skills, challenge his own assumptions, and commit to a different approach to leadership. Yes, ma'am, Marcus replied. I'm prepared to accept that responsibility, and I won't let you down. Admiral Chen stood up, indicating that the meeting was concluding. I hope not, Sergeant Thompson. I'll be watching your progress closely, and I expect to see measurable improvements in both your personal performance and the overall effectiveness of security operations. As Marcus prepared to leave the office, Admiral Chen added one final comment. Sergeant Thompson, I want you to remember something important. Leadership isn't about asserting authority over other people. Real leadership is about helping others succeed and creating environments where everyone can contribute their best efforts. I think you have the potential to be that kind of leader. Marcus left Admiral Chen's office with a completely different understanding of his situation than he had carried into it. Instead of facing career-ending consequences for his mistake, he had been given an opportunity to grow professionally and contribute to positive changes at the base. More importantly, he had gained insights into his own behavior and attitudes that would influence how he approached his responsibilities for years to come. As he walked back across the base toward the security checkpoint, where he would begin implementing Admiral Chen's vision, Marcus reflected on the remarkable turn of events. The woman he had so misjudged had turned out to be someone with the wisdom and leadership skills to transform his biggest professional mistake into an opportunity for growth and contribution. The question now was whether he would be able to live up to the confidence Admiral Chen had shown in him and become the kind of leader she had envisioned. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but Marcus approached his new responsibilities with a dedication that surprised even him. Within a week of his meeting with Admiral Chen, he had completely reorganized his approach to checkpoint operations. Gone were the rigid enforcement tactics that had characterized his previous work. Instead, he began each interaction with a genuine effort to help people understand and navigate the base's security requirements. The change was immediately noticeable to personnel who regularly passed through the checkpoint. Where Marcus had previously been seen as someone to avoid or appease, he became known as someone who would take the time to explain procedures, answer questions, and ensure that everyone felt welcomed while maintaining appropriate security standards. Word spread quickly through the base about the dramatic shift in Marcus's attitude and approach. Admiral Chen had arranged for Marcus to attend a week-long training program focused on customer service and organizational psychology. The program, conducted at a military education center in Virginia, exposed Marcus to concepts and techniques he had never encountered during his regular military training. He learned about communication styles, conflict resolution, and methods for creating positive interactions even in potentially stressful situations. One of the most valuable aspects of the training was the opportunity to practice new approaches with other personnel who were facing similar challenges at their own installations. Marcus discovered that many military facilities were struggling with issues related to respect, communication, and morale. The problem Admiral Chen had identified at Naval Base Coronado was not unique, but her approach to addressing it was innovative and forward-thinking. When Marcus returned from training, he found that Admiral Chen had already begun implementing broader changes throughout the base. She had established regular forums where personnel from different units could discuss operational challenges and share ideas for improvement. She had also instituted a policy requiring all supervisory personnel to spend time each month working alongside their subordinates to better understand their daily responsibilities and challenges. Marcus's role in these broader initiatives was to serve as a bridge between security operations and the rest of the base community. He began attending unit meetings where he could explain security procedures and gather feedback about how those procedures affected different types of operations. These meetings revealed problems and inefficiencies that had existed for years but had never been properly addressed. For example, Marcus learned that civilian contractors working on construction projects often experienced significant delays at security checkpoints because the procedures for verifying their credentials were unnecessarily complicated. Working with Admiral Chen's staff, Marcus helped develop a streamlined system that maintained security standards while reducing wait times and frustration for contractors. Similarly, Marcus discovered that military families living on base housing frequently had difficulties when guests visited, particularly during evenings and weekends, when fewer staff members were available to assist with entry procedures. He worked with base housing officials to establish a guest registration system that allowed families to pre-authorize visitors, reducing delays and improving the overall experience for everyone involved. These changes required Marcus to develop skills he had never needed before. He learned how to facilitate meetings, analyze operational processes, and present recommendations to senior leadership. Most importantly, he learned how to listen carefully to other people's perspectives and incorporate their insights into practical solutions. The most significant test of Marcus's transformation came about 6 weeks after his meeting with Admiral Chen. A large joint training exercise was scheduled to take place at the base, involving personnel from multiple services and several allied nations. The exercise would bring hundreds of unfamiliar people through the security checkpoints, creating exactly the kind of high-stress situation where Marcus had previously struggled. Admiral Chen assigned Marcus to lead the security coordination for the exercise, working directly with representatives from all participating units to ensure smooth entry and exit procedures. This responsibility required him to anticipate problems before they occurred and develop systems that would work effectively even under pressure. Marcus spent weeks preparing for the exercise, meeting with unit coordinators, studying the backgrounds and requirements of visiting personnel, and training other security staff on the new customer service approaches he had learned. He created detailed procedures manuals, established clear communication protocols, and set up support systems to handle any issues that might arise during the exercise. The week of the exercise was intense and challenging, but it demonstrated how dramatically Marcus's capabilities and approach had evolved. Instead of viewing the visiting personnel as potential security threats or sources of problems, he treated them as guests who deserved assistance and respect while they participated in important training activities. When a group of foreign military officers arrived with credentials that didn't fit the base's standard verification procedures, Marcus worked with them patiently to understand their requirements and find appropriate solutions rather than simply rejecting their entry. When equipment transporters faced difficulties navigating the checkpoint with oversized loads, Marcus coordinated with multiple departments to establish alternative routes that maintained security while allowing the exercise to proceed on schedule. Perhaps most importantly, when junior personnel working under Marcus's supervision faced difficult situations during the exercise, he provided guidance and support rather than criticism. He had learned from Admiral Chen's example that effective leadership meant helping others succeed rather than demonstrating his own authority. Admiral Chen observed Marcus's performance during the exercise, both through direct observation and through feedback from other personnel. She was impressed not just by his technical competence, but by the way he had internalized and applied the leadership principles they had discussed during their initial meeting. After the exercise concluded successfully, Admiral Chen called Marcus to another meeting in her office. This time, however, the atmosphere was completely different from their first encounter. Marcus entered the office with confidence rather than anxiety, and Admiral Chen greeted him with a smile of genuine approval. "Sergeant Thompson," Admiral Chen began, "the joint exercise was a remarkable success, and your contributions were a major factor in that success. I've received commendations from multiple unit commanders about the professionalism and helpfulness of security operations." Marcus felt a sense of pride that went far beyond any recognition he had received in his previous military service. The praise was meaningful not just because it came from Admiral Chen, but because it reflected his genuine growth as a leader and professional. More importantly, Admiral Chen continued, "I've seen evidence that your new approach is influencing other personnel throughout the base. The changes we've been implementing are starting to create a positive cultural shift that extends far beyond security operations." Admiral Chen was right about the broader impact of the changes. Marcus had noticed that personnel throughout the base were beginning to approach their interactions with each other differently. The emphasis on respect, assistance, and mutual support was becoming evident in various departments and activities. For example, the base motor pool had started providing educational sessions for new drivers rather than simply issuing citations for minor violations. The communications department had established help desks to assist personnel with technology issues, instead of requiring them to struggle through complicated procedures on their own. The base exchange had instituted customer service training for all staff members. These changes were creating a positive feedback loop that was improving morale and efficiency throughout the installation. Personnel were more willing to ask for help when they needed it, more likely to offer assistance to their colleagues, and more committed to maintaining high standards in their own work. Admiral Chen had documented these improvements in her regular reports to higher command levels, and Naval Base Coronado was beginning to gain recognition as a model for effective organizational culture. Other installations were sending representatives to study the changes that had been implemented and consider adapting similar approaches. "Sergeant Thompson," Admiral Chen said, "I want to discuss your future career prospects. Based on your performance over the past several months, I believe you have potential for advancement to more senior leadership positions. However, that advancement will require additional education and training." Admiral Chen outlined several opportunities for Marcus to develop his leadership skills further. She recommended him for advanced professional military education programs that would prepare him for supervisory roles at higher levels. She also suggested that he consider pursuing civilian education in areas like organizational psychology or business management to complement his military experience. Marcus was overwhelmed by the possibilities Admiral Chen was presenting. Just months earlier, he had been focused primarily on completing his daily duties without making mistakes. Now he was being encouraged to think about contributing to significant organizational improvements and advancing to positions of greater responsibility. "Ma'am," Marcus said, "I need to thank you for the opportunity you've given me. I realize now that what happened at the checkpoint was actually the beginning of the most important learning experience of my career." Admiral Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Sergeant Thompson, I want you to understand something important. The opportunity I gave you was really just permission to discover capabilities you already possessed. The growth and improvements you've achieved came from your own efforts and commitment. She paused before continuing. That's a lesson that applies to leadership in general. The most effective leaders don't create success for other people. They create environments and opportunities where people can achieve success for themselves. As their meeting continued, Admiral Chen shared more details about her plans for the base's continued development. She was implementing mentorship programs that would pair experienced personnel with newer staff members, establishing cross-training initiatives that would help people understand different aspects of base operations, and creating feedback systems that would allow continuous improvement in policies and procedures. Marcus would play a key role in many of these initiatives, serving not just as a participant but as someone who could help design and implement effective programs. His experience with both the challenges and the solutions would make him valuable in helping other personnel navigate their own professional development. The meeting concluded with Admiral Chen asking Marcus to prepare a comprehensive report on the changes that had been implemented in security operations, including specific recommendations for how similar approaches could be applied in other areas of the base. The report would be shared with other installation commanders and potentially used as a model for broader military applications. As Marcus left Admiral Chen's office, he reflected on the remarkable journey he had experienced over the past few months. The incident at the security checkpoint that had seemed like a career-ending disaster had instead become the catalyst for the most meaningful and rewarding period of his military service. More than that, the experience had fundamentally changed his understanding of leadership, respect, and professional growth. He had learned that effective leadership was about empowering others rather than controlling them, that respect had to be earned through actions rather than demanded through authority, and that professional growth required honest self-reflection and willingness to change. Marcus also realized that Admiral Chen had demonstrated remarkable wisdom in how she had handled their initial encounter. Rather than simply punishing his mistake, she had used it as an opportunity to address broader issues and help him develop into a more effective leader. Her approach had achieved far more positive results than traditional disciplinary measures could have accomplished. As he walked back toward the security checkpoint where his transformation had begun, Marcus thought about the personnel he would encounter during the remainder of his shift. Each interaction would be an opportunity to apply the principles he had learned, to treat others with respect and dignity, and to contribute to the positive culture that was developing throughout the base. The checkpoint looked the same as it had months earlier, but Marcus's perspective on his role there had changed completely. Instead of viewing it as a place where he enforced compliance, he now saw it as an opportunity to welcome people to the base, help them understand important procedures, and represent the best values of military service. The water hose that had been the instrument of his mistake was still there, coiled neatly beside the security station, but now it served only its intended purpose, helping to keep the checkpoint clean and presentable for the thousands of people who passed through each week. The transformation was complete, both in the physical environment and in Marcus's approach to his responsibilities there. 1 year later, Marcus stood in the same conference room where Admiral Chen had first presented her vision for transforming the base culture. But this time, he wasn't there as someone learning about change. He was there as someone presenting the results of that change to a delegation of senior officers from installations across the Pacific Fleet. The transformation at Naval Base Coronado had exceeded everyone's expectations. What had begun as Admiral Chen's response to a single inappropriate incident had evolved into a comprehensive model for military leadership and organizational culture that was now being studied and implemented throughout the Navy. Marcus had been promoted to Petty Officer First Class, an advancement that reflected not just his improved performance, but his emerging role as a leader in the base's cultural transformation. More significantly, he had been selected to attend the Navy's Senior Leadership Development Program, an opportunity that would prepare him for supervisory responsibilities at much higher levels. As Marcus reviewed his presentation materials one final time, he reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought him to this moment. The security checkpoint incident that had once seemed like the end of his career had instead become the foundation for achievements he could never have imagined. The delegation visiting the base included commanders from installations that were experiencing their own challenges with morale, efficiency, and personnel relationships. They had come to Naval Base Coronado specifically to understand how Admiral Chen's leadership approach had achieved such dramatic improvements in such a relatively short time. Admiral Chen introduced Marcus to the delegation as someone who embodied the principles they were there to study. Petty Officer Thompson, she explained, represents the potential that exists within every organization when we create environments that encourage growth rather than simply punish mistakes. Marcus began his presentation by sharing the story of his own transformation, including the checkpoint incident that had initiated his learning process. He spoke honestly about his initial attitudes and behaviors, the assumptions he had made, and the ways his understanding of leadership had evolved. The visiting officers were particularly interested in the practical aspects of the changes that had been implemented. Marcus walked them through specific examples of how security operations had been redesigned, how training programs had been restructured, and how performance evaluation systems had been modified to emphasize development rather than just compliance. One commander from a West Coast installation asked about the most challenging aspects of implementing cultural change. Marcus explained that the biggest obstacle had been helping personnel understand that respect and high standards weren't contradictory concepts. Many people had initially assumed that treating others with dignity meant accepting lower performance levels. What we learned, Marcus explained, is that people actually perform better when they feel respected and supported. The traditional approach of using criticism and punishment to motivate improvement often creates defensive behaviors that interfere with learning and growth. Marcus shared specific metrics that demonstrated the effectiveness of the new approach. Security checkpoint processing times had improved by 30%, while satisfaction ratings from base personnel had increased dramatically. Most importantly, the number of incidents involving conflicts between security staff and base personnel had decreased to nearly zero. The improvements weren't limited to security operations. Throughout the base, departments that had adopted similar approaches were reporting better teamwork, higher morale, and increased efficiency. The motor pool had reduced accident rates while improving vehicle maintenance standards. The communications department had decreased help desk response times while increasing customer satisfaction scores. A commander from an East Coast facility asked about sustainability. How could they ensure that positive changes would continue even if key personnel transferred to new assignments? This question reflected one of the most important challenges in military environments, where frequent personnel changes could disrupt even the best initiatives. Marcus explained that Admiral Chen had addressed this concern by embedding the new approaches into formal training programs, policy documents, and evaluation criteria. Rather than depending on individual personalities or informal practices, the cultural changes had been institutionalized through systematic modifications to how the base operated. We also established mentorship programs that ensure continuity, Marcus added. When experienced personnel transfer, they spend time training their replacements not just in technical procedures, but in the leadership principles that make those procedures effective. The delegation spent the remainder of the day observing operations throughout the base, interviewing personnel at various levels, and documenting specific practices they wanted to implement at their own installations. Marcus served as their guide, explaining the reasoning behind different approaches and answering questions about implementation challenges. One of the most meaningful moments of the day occurred when the delegation visited the security checkpoint where Marcus's transformation had begun. Several of the visiting officers commented on the positive atmosphere and professional interactions they observed there. Personnel passing through the checkpoint were clearly comfortable asking questions and seeking assistance, while security staff demonstrated both competence and genuine helpfulness. A young seaman who had recently completed basic training approached Marcus during the visit. "Petty Officer Thompson," she said, "I wanted to thank you for the orientation session you conducted when I arrived last month. You helped me understand not just the procedures but the reasons behind them. It made me feel welcomed rather than intimidated." After the delegation had departed that evening, Admiral Chen invited Marcus to join her for a private debrief in her office. She wanted to discuss not just the day's events, but Marcus's continued professional development and future plans. "Your presentation today was outstanding," Admiral Chen began. "You've developed into exactly the kind of leader this organization needs. More importantly, you've demonstrated that our approach to developing personnel can achieve remarkable results." Marcus appreciated the recognition, but he was more interested in discussing the broader implications of what they had accomplished together. "Ma'am, what I've learned over the past year is that leadership is really about creating conditions where other people can succeed. That seems simple, but it requires a completely different mindset than what I had before." Admiral Chen smiled. "That's exactly right, and it's why I believe you're ready for greater responsibilities. I've been discussing your future with the Personnel Development Board, and we have some significant opportunities to consider." Admiral Chen outlined several possibilities for Marcus's next assignment. One option was a position on the staff of the Chief of Naval Personnel, where he would help develop leadership training programs for implementation throughout the Navy. Another possibility was assignment to a challenging installation that needed the kind of cultural transformation they had achieved at Coronado. "There's also an opportunity for you to attend graduate school," Admiral Chen added. "The Navy is offering advanced education opportunities for personnel who demonstrate potential for senior leadership positions. You could pursue a master's degree in organizational psychology or public administration while continuing your military service. Marcus was overwhelmed by the options being presented. Just over a year earlier, he had been worried about basic career survival. Now he was being offered opportunities that could shape his entire future and allow him to contribute to meaningful improvements throughout the military. Ma'am, I'm interested in all of these possibilities, but I want to make sure I choose the path where I can have the greatest positive impact. Admiral Chen considered his response carefully. Marcus, I think the most important thing is that you continue to grow and develop your capabilities. The specific assignment matters less than your commitment to applying what you've learned in service of something larger than yourself. Their conversation continued for another hour as they discussed the various factors Marcus should consider in making his decision. Admiral Chen shared insights from her own career about the importance of seeking challenges that would stretch his abilities while remaining true to his values and principles. As their meeting concluded, Admiral Chen offered one final piece of guidance. Marcus, remember that leadership development is a lifelong process. What you've accomplished this year is significant, but it's really just the beginning of what you can achieve if you remain committed to learning and growing. Over the following weeks, Marcus reflected deeply on his options and eventually decided to accept the graduate education opportunity. He would spend 2 years earning a master's degree in organizational leadership while also serving as a research assistant studying military personnel development. This combination would allow him to contribute to academic research while preparing for future leadership responsibilities. The decision meant that Marcus would be leaving Naval Base Coronado, but he felt confident that the changes implemented there would continue. Admiral Chen had successfully institutionalized the cultural improvements, and other personnel had emerged as leaders capable of sustaining and building upon the foundation that had been established. Marcus's final weeks at Coronado were filled with transition activities, farewell events, and reflection on everything he had experienced. The base that had once seemed routine and predictable had become a place of remarkable learning and growth. More importantly, it had become a community where people genuinely supported each other's success and development. On his last day at the security checkpoint, Marcus took time to walk around the area where his transformation had begun. The physical space looked much the same as it had over a year earlier, but the atmosphere was completely different. Personnel passing through interacted with security staff as colleagues and fellow professionals rather than as adversaries in an enforcement relationship. Marcus thought about the young woman who had approached the checkpoint on that Tuesday morning in July. Admiral Chen had demonstrated remarkable wisdom and leadership in how she had chosen to address his mistake. Instead of simply punishing inappropriate behavior, she had used the incident as an opportunity to examine broader issues and create positive change. That evening, Admiral Chen hosted a farewell reception for Marcus at the Officers' Club. Personnel from throughout the base attended to express their appreciation for his contributions and wish him well in his future endeavors. The event reflected the strong relationships and sense of community that had developed under Admiral Chen's leadership. During the reception, Master Chief Rodriguez, who had played such an important role in Marcus's initial learning process, offered a toast. To Marcus Thompson, Rodriguez said, who reminds us all that our biggest mistakes can become our greatest opportunities if we approach them with honesty, humility, and determination to grow. As Marcus prepared to leave Naval Base Coronado for his graduate studies, he carried with him lessons that would influence every aspect of his future service. He had learned that effective leadership required continuous self-reflection, that respect had to be earned through actions rather than demanded through authority, and that the most important role of any leader was to create environments where others could achieve their potential. The security checkpoint where his journey had begun now served as a symbol of transformation and possibility, rather than a reminder of failure and embarrassment. The water hose that had once been an instrument of poor judgment had returned to its intended purpose, helping to maintain the cleanliness and professional appearance that reflected the base's commitment to excellence. Marcus's story had become part of the base's culture, shared with new personnel as an example of how mistakes could become learning opportunities and how individuals could grow beyond their initial limitations. It demonstrated that the most important qualification for leadership wasn't the absence of mistakes, but the wisdom to learn from them and the commitment to help others do the same. As his car pulled away from Naval Base Coronado for the final time, Marcus reflected on Admiral Chen's observation that leadership development was a lifelong process. His experience at the base had provided a foundation for future growth, but it had also instilled in him an understanding that every interaction with another person was an opportunity to practice leadership principles. The incident at the security checkpoint had taught Marcus that first impressions could be devastatingly wrong, that authority without respect was meaningless, and that the most powerful leadership tool was the ability to help others succeed. These lessons would guide him throughout his graduate studies and into whatever leadership challenges awaited him in the years ahead. Most importantly, Marcus had learned that redemption and growth were always possible for people willing to examine their mistakes honestly and commit to doing better. Admiral Chen had given him that opportunity, but the growth itself had come through his own efforts to understand, change, and contribute to something larger than himself. The story that had begun with failure and embarrassment had evolved into one of learning, growth, and positive contribution. It would continue to unfold as Marcus applied his hard-earned wisdom to new challenges and opportunities, always remembering the lessons learned at a security checkpoint on a hot Tuesday morning in July.